The desert can hide a multitude of sins. But sometimes the desert gives up its secrets, and it often happens in the most startling, accidental way.
That is exactly what happened in February 2009. We're in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in a suburban area called West Mesa. It's mostly just these big, open, arid stretches of land.
Right?
And 100-acre lot, in particular, had just been scraped bare for a new housing project. But then the 2008 housing collapse hit, and, well, everything just stopped.
So you have this huge empty lot. And on a quiet evening, a local resident, Christine Ross, is out walking her dog, a Shar-Pei mix named Ruka.
Yep. And Ruka does what dogs do, runs off, explores, and comes back a few moments later carrying something. But it's not a stick, it's a bone.
And she knew right away something was wrong.
Oh, yeah. She was disturbed enough to snap a photo and text it to her sister, who happened to be a nurse. And the reply she got back was, chilling, instantaneous. It just said, that's a human femur.
Wow. And that one moment, a dog's curiosity in an abandoned construction zone, that kicks off one of the largest, most complex serial killer investigations in American history.
It really does, because over the next year, investigators just painstakingly excavated that dry Arroyo bank, and they didn't find one victim or two. They found the skeletal remains of 11 women and girls
11.
and an unborn child, all buried in these shallow, clandestine graves.
So for this deep dive, we're going to try and unpack the horrifying mystery of who the media dubbed the West Mesa Bone Collector. We'll look at the evidence the desert preserved and the two major persons of interest who police think are responsible.
But before we even get to the crime scene, we have to talk about the one person whose work really laid the foundation for all of this, even though she didn't know it. Detective Ida Lopez of the Albuquerque Police.
Okay, so what was her role before the discovery?
Well, long before Ruka found that femur, Detective Lopez was tracking a really disturbing trend. Between 2001 and 2006, she'd compiled a list of 17 missing women in the area.
17.
Yeah. She felt this connection to them. She privately called them her girls. She knew something was happening, some kind of pattern, but she struggled for years to get the resources to connect all those dots.
And that's a critical distinction, right? The difference between a stack of missing persons files and a confirmed serial killer investigation.
It's everything.
Yeah.
And it brings us to the victims themselves and why this case stayed cold for so long. Their profile is just tragically consistent.
Tell us about that.
They were all young, ranged in age from 15 up to their early 30s. The majority were Hispanic, and most had histories that involved substance use or sex work, sometimes both.
Which means they were living in these very marginalized, low-visibility communities.
Exactly. And that's where the societal failure just becomes so clear. When someone from these communities goes missing, their absence, it's often not reported right away. Or if it is, the cases just don't get the same attention. They languish because of these, deeply ingrained biases.
It even got to the point where there was legislative action about it. I think it was Senate Memorial 85. It noted that the victims were often depicted in the media as criminals themselves, not as victims. It just denied their humanity.
Completely. And that's why it's so important to remember them as people, like Jamie Barella. She was only 15. She was the only victim with no known history of drugs or sex work. She just vanished with her older cousin, Evelyn Salazar.
Her inclusion just shows how wide the killer's net really was.
It does. And then there's Selenia Edwards, also 15, the only African-American victim and the only one from out-of-state Oklahoma. Police suspected she was what they call a circuit girl, moving along major trucking routes like I-40. So very mobile, very hard to track.
The scale of the tragedy is just immense.
It is. I mean, you have Gina Michelle Valdez, 22 and 4 months pregnant, or Doreen Marquez, who left behind 2 daughters. The common thread wasn't a specific behavior. It was just vulnerability.
And the way the world found out about it is just, it's this piece of grim irony. This wasn't some meticulous police search that found them.
Not at all. It was pure coincidence. So remember that stalled development. The land sat empty. And by 2008, people in the nearby neighborhood started complaining about major flooding every time it rained.
So the developer had to do something.
Right. They built a retaining wall to channel all that storm runoff into a retention pond. What they unintentionally did was create these massive erosion channels, and that water just washed away years of dirt and sand. Nature was the excavator here.
But that delay, years between when they disappeared and when they were found, that must have created a forensic nightmare.
The total nightmare. The women vanished between 2003 and 2005. They aren't found until 2009. After years of burials, sun, animals, the remains were just skeletons, heartbreakingly, just bones.
So no soft tissue, which for an investigator is catastrophic.
Catastrophic, yeah. They could rule the deaths homicidal violence, that was clear. But the exact cause, strangulation, blunt force trauma, impossible to tell. Any ligature marks, any bruising, all of it was just gone. Erased by the desert before the crime scene was even found.
So they were relying on dental records, DNA from families, just to get IDs.
Exactly. The desert destroyed the timeline and the method.
Hmm.
But it didn't keep all its secrets. And this is where the case pivots.
Okay, so what was the clue that broke things open?
With the remains of one victim, Virginia Cloven, investigators found something that didn't belong. A small plastic bag. It wasn't a garbage bag or clothing. It was a plant container. You know, the kind you get from a
Your
nursery.
plant bag. That's odd.
Very odd. Specifically, it was the packaging for a spearmint juniper shrub. And that one little piece of trash becomes the physical thread connecting this burial site to a potential suspect.
This is where we get to the investigation's focal point then. The two men police believe are responsible.
Right, and a huge reason they focused on them is that the disappearances just stopped, abruptly, in late 2006, which strongly suggests the killer was either dead or in prison by then.
Let's start with suspect number 1, Lorenzo Montoya. Police seem to see him as the most likely culprit.
They do. First, the geography is undeniable. He lived less than 3 miles from the burial site. And there are even reports back in 2006 of dirt trails leading directly from his trailer park right to that West Mesa lot.
And his history. It aligns perfectly with the profile.
Terrifyingly so.
Yeah.
He'd been arrested twice for violent attacks on sex workers. He was a known stalker in that area. He even told his girlfriend once he would kill and bury her in lime. Co-workers said he used to talk about killing women and burying them on the West Mesa.
Wow. And the timing of his death is also incredibly damning.
It is. The killings seem to stop right when Montoya commits his last crime. In December 2006, he raped and strangled a 19-year-old sex worker named Sharika Hill. But while he was trying to load her body into his trunk, her boyfriend shot and killed him.
So his death lines up almost perfectly with when the disappearances ended.
Almost perfectly. And then you have what they found in his home. It's like something out of a horror movie.
What was it?
A home recording on his camera. The video part shows him with a woman, but then it cuts to black. But the audio keeps going, and you can clearly hear the sound of duct tape being ripped from a roll, and then the crinkle of a large garbage bag being opened.
So investigators think he was recording himself preparing a body for disposal?
That's the theory, yeah.
That's a very compelling case against Montoya. So why is there a second person of interest? Why isn't this case closed?
That's the core tension, right? They can almost prove it was him. But the desert destroyed that irrefutable forensic link. That one-to-one DNA match to those 11 specific graves just isn't there. Which brings us to suspect number 2, Joseph Blee.
And Blee was already in prison. He was known as the mid-school rapist from crimes back in the 80s, serving a 90-year sentence.
Correct. And he also fit the profile. History of stalking sex workers. And here's a crucial link. His DNA was found on the clothing of a separate murdered sex worker in Albuquerque. So he was operating in that same lethal world.
But the link to the West Mesa graves, that ties back to that weird piece of evidence, right? The plant tag.
The spearmint juniper. That's the smoking gun that brought Blee into focus. Investigators traced that nursery tag to a local garden center that Blee went to all the time. Why? Because he worked in landscaping. So he had the knowledge, the access, the means to have that specific item with him at that remote site.
And he supposedly made some kind of confession in prison.
Allegedly, yes. He told a cellmate he'd hired the West Mesa victims, and then he called them trashy. It showed both knowledge of them and this deep contempt.
So you have two men, one dead, one in prison, both with violent histories, both connected to the scene, both fitting the MO. But the case is still officially unsolved.
Right. And the roadblock is purely forensic. The lack of that definitive DNA.
So what are they doing about that?
They're trying to change the law. The APD is supporting a new bill in New Mexico that would let them test the DNA of deceased felony suspects, like Montoya, against the national database.
Why do they need a new law for that? Can't they just test his DNA?
You'd think so, but current privacy laws often treat a deceased person's genetic material with similar protections to a living person's, especially in a cold case like this. So this bill would open the door to finally make that conclusive link and hopefully bring some resolution to these families.
And that resolution is so desperately needed, especially when you realize this might be bigger than the 11 victims they found.
That's the fear. Detective Lopez's original list had 17 names. There are still 8 women from that time period, women like Nina Herron and Leah Peoples, who are unaccounted for.
So the West Mesa site might just be the one grave they found by accident. There could be others.
It's a very real possibility
Yeah.
that it was just the first mass grave to be revealed.
To honor the victims who were found, there is now a women's memorial park on that site. It's a permanent reminder of the lives that were lost.
But the mystery still hangs over the city. And while the police are focused on Montoya and Blee, some criminologists have proposed an alternative theory, maybe an even more chilling one.
Which is what? That this wasn't the work of a lone killer.
It's exactly. Criminologist Dirk Gibson raised the possibility of a commercial serial killer, someone operating as part of an organized crime effort, maybe a trafficking ring. In that scenario, the women weren't just random victims. They were disposed of because they knew something they shouldn't have known.
So if that theory is true, if the West Mesa was just a convenient dumping ground for a larger criminal enterprise.
Then the really chilling question you have to ask is, are the people responsible for all this still out there? Hidden because the focus has been on two men who are already off the board. It leaves you with this unsettling thought that maybe we've only scratched the surface of this crime.